A lone mother walks into a tiny cafe. With her tiny boy seemed worn out, but convinced that the world appears to be. Unaware of her difficulties as she attempts to provide her son with a basic meal after. The anxiety increases after a long day when a nasty waiter makes fun of her in front of everyone is humiliating the mother, as well as the son. Heartbroken, but only when it appears. Their biggest enemy, a silent alien in the. When the corner rises, what follows? Keanu Reeves' transformation of everything. In this moment, everyone will be left unable to speak and impart a lesson to nobody. We'll always remember, let's see how this. An average day was transformed into a memorable one for a woman and her toddler. Keep an eye on. Observe how the heartbreak and the twists. Sudden bravery that will leave you. Lively was the inspiration for the diner, but tumultuous with the sound of plates as well as muted discussions in the cacophony. 1. Sarah, the mother, came in with her 5-year-old Danny, son. She appeared worn out in her clothes. Her face is clean and a touch weathered. Showed a combination of resolve and. Danny gripped his mother's hand in silent concern. Hand looked over the vibrant menu with. Thrilled, they took a seat in a corner. Sarah fumbled with her purse in the booth. Taking into account the few remaining bills, she grinned at Danny's disguise. Worry, you are free to choose anything you like. Dear, she said. Danny pointed quietly, his eyes brightening. To a tiny Friday combination burger exactly as. Sarah was going to give the waiter a call. Walked over to them and invited a man to his mid-30s with a rigid stance and a not liking. With a frown, his name badge said. Can I help you, Mark? He inquired in a tone keen and. Sarah smiled politely, impatiently. She started to give orders, but Mark's eyes glanced at her attire, then at Danny and returned to her. He cut you off. Are you certain you? We are running because we can afford that, ma'am. A charity here, and the room remained upright. Quiet, although those around them looked. Sarah, their eyes were full of condemnation. Stopped the embarrassment sting permeating her. Yes, I can, she muttered, chest hardly higher than hay. Danny whispers that he senses his mother's. Uncomfortable, he sank back in his chair. Diminished joy. It's all right, Mommy, I don't require fries. Mark tugged at her arm in a whisper. Mumbled, well, hurry, and rolled his eyes. He turned, up, I don't have all day. Abruptly leaving before Sarah could. Her eyes filled with tears as she responded, but she swiftly blinked them away with the intention of. Stay strong for her. Keanu's son at a table close to the corner. Reeves wears jeans and a basic sweatshirt. Saw the whole scene that he had been sipping his coffee in silence, yet the laid-back attitude changed to one of concentration. In silent focus, his piercing eyes tracked the server as he vanished into the presence of kitchen. Keanu went overlooked by most, but those who looked in his direction would have witnessed the decision. He placed his coffee in his eyes, down and yet leaned back a little. Seeing Sarah's attempts to console Danny, Mark came back with their meal following in. After an excessively lengthy wait, he dropped the plates clattering loudly on the table. Shocking. There, Danny, Mark curtly stated, that's the best you can do is to avoid creating a mess. Sarah's cheeks turned red with. She managed to mumble, thank you, humiliation. Her voice wavered, but Mark ignored it. To reply, he already turned away. Keanu got up. His chair's clatter caught his attention. However, Keanu walked calmly and didn't hurry. His approach to Sarah's table, commanding but unassuming as he got closer, Mark saw. He scowled and said, "May I assist you, Sir Mark?" Inquired in a tone that was brimming with frustration. Keanu briefly disregarded him. Speaking to Sarah. "Rather, pardon me, ma'am," he replied softly. "Couldn't resist observing how you end. I would like to join you for the treatment of your son." Sarah's eyes widened as she gazed up for a second. With, "Yes, surprise, but you don't have to." "Pull out a chair," Keanu replied insistently. After taking a seat opposite Danny, he gave the youngster a loving smile and said, "Hello, champ." "Danny, what's your name?" the boy said. Shilly's previous melancholy giving way to curiosity. "Well, Danny," Keanu went on, "you have excellent burger taste and classic choice fries." Danny chuckled quietly. Sarah's spirits are being raised by him in the meantime. Glanced between the curious and Keanu. Looks from the other customers who weren't sure how to interpret the circumstance where Mark feels disregarded and angry. Stepping. "Please pardon me, but this is my table. I recommend you if you don't want anything." Keanu interrupted him with a cool but strong, "Speak up because I don't want to see anyone handled like you just handled this." Mark, my family, blinked, surprised that I was. He said, "I'm just doing my job." "Defend your job," Keanu said, averting your gaze. "Your role is to assist. You don't know why people don't judge them own tail, and you have no right to presume that the diner's tension was." It was evident that everyone was watching Keanu and Mark. The latter is sliding uneasily beneath the scrutiny. Sarah stared in disbelief. Silence, uncertain of whether to. Keanu turned to Sarah and intervened, saying, "Done nothing improperly." He stated that you're more powerful than you believe, and you're establishing a remarkable model for your. Sarah's eyes welled up with tears instead of shame, but of appreciation for the first time that night, she felt. Keanu got to his feet and turned back to Mark. "You may want to consider what the type of person you are displaying. To be fair," he stated, "because at this moment, I wouldn't want that person to serve me the sill." When Keanu went back to his chair, the diner's atmosphere was electrifying. The room was filled with whispers that customers looking at each other, realizing who he was and that others just astounded by his. Sarah intervened by sitting frozen for attempting to comprehend what had just. Danny is now sitting up straight after what transpired. Grinned and pulled at his mother's sleeve. "Mommy, that man is sweet," remarked in amazement, and Sarah's smile remained feeble. She looked, too overcome to reply, towards Keanu's seat at the table, having a calm manner while sipping his coffee, unaltered as if nothing had happened. Amazing things had occurred, but for Sarah, this particular instance was life-altering. In the meantime, Mark the server rushed into the kitchen while murmuring beneath. One of the cooks lifted an eyebrow at his breath. "What's so agitating you, eyebrow?" asked a man who believes he is a hero. Mark snapped and stuck his nose in the area where it isn't appropriate. The cook laughed at you. "I mean the man who defended that mother. He may have a point. You're somewhat of a." Mark frowned but said, "Jerk, sometimes." Nothing, yet he secretly felt the pain of shame, but his pride saved him from acknowledging it at one of the other tables at Sarah's. Customers and an elderly woman seated close by. That man leaned over and put that Didn't he have a waiter in his place? She said. Kindly, you have a guardian angel. Sarah nodded, keeping watch over you tonight. I'm not even sure why her voice is still unsteady. Who is he? She acknowledged that the woman grinned. Well, if you're not sure, let me. I'm Keanu Reeves, and that's from what I've observed, he's as generous as. Sarah's eyes reportedly expanded in. Keanu Reeves, the actor, incredulously. The woman said, dear, and he simply gave. He won't teach the waiter a lesson. Remember how Danny's face brightened with excitation, Mama. The kind man is well known. He muttered. Keanu heard the exchange loudly and laughed quietly to himself, then looked over to Sarah and offered her a comforting. Her face reddened, but this time she smiled. Was not from shame, but rather from appreciation to the restaurant manager, a middle-aged man wearing a stern look. Heard and emerged from the rear. Regarding the disturbance, his gaze swept the space until they touched down on. Keanu instantly recognized him as the manager's attitude changed to one of anxious. The manager, Mr. Reeves, started. I approached Keanu's table hesitantly. Didn't know you were present. Whatever we can do to help you. Keanu's coffee experience was improved. Down and glanced up at his serene gaze. However, sincerely, I believe the query is, what are you going to do, Mom, to make this? Her son had a better experience, he added, pointing discreetly at Sarah's table. The manager's expression flushed as he understood how serious the situation was. He swiftly nodded and moved to, I really apologize, Sarah ma'am, for how you were handled in that manner. Unacceptable, and it won't, I promise, occur. Sarah was taken by surprise once more and nodded. Thank you. Slowly, she said. The manager then turned to Mark in silence, whom the kitchen had just brought back into view. Mark, the manager, still has a grumpy face. Stated clearly that we must speak in my. Mark froze in the office, his face as white as. The manager escorted him and the other employees away. Exchanged glances, with several expressing satisfaction. Others worried Keanu, who was seeing the scene, unfolded and sighed quietly, not enjoying. Observing others receive criticism, but he understood that responsibility was essential. As he got about to depart, he gave the waitress a friendly gesture. Youthful lady who had been working for the other, pardon me, tables, Keanu said courteously. I pay for their meal, he said. Both Sarah and the waitress Danny grinned at her, eyes brightening. Naturally, sir, that's really considerate of you. Keanu shook his head, saying that being kind isn't optional, but necessary, he stated with a. The waitress nodded, prompted by a tiny smile. By his statements, and proceeded to resolve the bill. Will leave Sarah as Keanu rose. Hurriedly got up and waited as she shouted out to her, voice quivering a little, I'm grateful for. Keanu turned around and started to walk back. He knelt down a little and returned to her table. Hey Danny, to get eye level with him. Kindly take care of your mother, okay? She's attractive. Amazing. Danny excitedly nodded, his face luminous with joy. I'll give you thanks, Mr. Keanu. Keanu got up, grinned, and turned to Sarah's face. You're stronger than you think, soft. Stated, never allow somebody to make you feel otherwise. Sarah started crying once more, but this time her eyes were tears of appreciation and empowerment. Many thanks to her. Keanu nodded slightly to her in a whisper, then turned and walked out of the diner. Behind a sense of wonder and inspiration, the diner gradually came back to its typical beat with a faint buzz of enthusiasm persisted following Keanu's. Sarah leaned back in her chair as she left. The tension she felt when grasping Danny's hand felt lighter after carrying it into the diner. Now, instead, she feels hopeful. Hadn't felt as Sarah in a long time. The waitress assisted Danny in finishing his lunch. Returned to their table, she was smiling slightly while holding an envelope. "This is for you," she remarked with a smile on her face. Giving it to Sarah blinked in perplexity. "What is this?" she inquired. The waitress pointed to the door where Keanu requested me to give it to him after he departed. "He said you would comprehend after you." Sarah hesitated for a bit before opening it. Prior to carefully tearing the envelope, there was a handwritten note inside, open. Basic stationery that reads for you. "You deserve more for your resilience and strength than the world occasionally provides you with. Something to somewhat ease the situation for Danny, and you remain resilient." At the bottom, Keanu's signature appeared on the note. There was a check for a certain amount attached. Much more than Sarah ever would have thought that as she read, her hands would shake. The quantity was sufficient to cover several months of food, rent, and other essentials. She looked at the bill in disbelief. The generosity of a complete stranger who had cried and asked for nothing in return. Once more in her eyes, but this time they were tears of appreciation and incredulity. Danny, observing his mother's transformation, expression questioned. Intriguingly, "What that?" Mommy Sarah grinned while wiping away her tears. "It's a present from someone very special to her son." Kind to the other customers who overheard the exchange, seen with admiration for the previous elder woman. Leaning over once more, "You see, sweetheart, he reminds me that there are nice individuals in the world." Sarah nodded in agreement, holding the verify and secure the note for the first time. In what seemed like an eternity, she permitted herself to experience the strain of her difficulties subside, even if only momentarily. In the meantime, Mark is in the kitchen, opposite the manager of the diner. The rebuke he anticipated arrived. Mark, the manager, spoke quickly and sternly. "Such conduct is not acceptable. If I've heard of another such event, you'll lose your job if I make it myself." Unwillingly, Mark nodded, maintaining eye contact during the conversation. Keanu had touched a nerve with him. Repeated the hearing moment in his head. "Echo," Keanu said, "you don't know their narrative." As Mark made his way back to the dining area, his manner appeared to have changed. Stayed away from Danny and Sarah, although observed the envelope she was holding, and their faces subdued joy for the first time. A glimmer of shame did not, since he had received criticism, but because he became aware of his judgment. Someone unjustly. As Sarah got ready to depart, the waitress came back with a little. She had a suitcase in her. "This is from us," she added, holding a grin a bit more to assist with your. "We hope it helps, but it's not much, son." Sarah discovered some nibbles inside. Danny, a tiny toy, and a message from the employees expressing regret for Mark's actions. Sarah said in a quiet voice, "Thank you." Full of appreciation, the waitress bent down a little to Danny's level. "Look after your mother." Danny agreed. "She's really special." Eagerly holding onto the tiny toy. "I will be grateful." As they left the dining establishment, Sarah stopped outside to breathe deeply, inhale the cool evening air. She looked cool against her face, down at Danny, who was holding her with joy. She said to Danny, "And you okay, buddy?" Smiled up at her, acknowledging that today was the... Sarah laughed softly on the nicest day ever, heart enlarging with a range of feelings. She silently looked back at the diner, expressing gratitude to the man who transformed their night, and possibly their lives and such. A surprising method that Sarah was unaware of was that Keanu's deed of generosity had established something more significant happening as Danny made his way home. The evening breeze carried a feeling of revitalization. The check in her, though more than a lifeline, the purse felt the cash. It was the generosity, and Keanu had treated her with the dignity that struck a deep chord. She gripped Danny's hand firmly, quietly committing to herself to overcome the difficulties and provide her with a better. Meanwhile, back at the diner, life is out. Something had been triggered by Keanu's actions. The waitress was taken aback by what she had seen and chosen to take. She took things into her own hands and collected employees in the break room throughout their shift change. She said, "Listen, we've all observed Mark's treatment of that mother hand. It's not only about what her son occurred today, and it concerns how we handle everyone that passes through their door." The employees exchanged a few nods, guilty looks. They were aware of Mark's actions wasn't a singular occurrence, and by remaining silent, they were implicated in the... As the waitress went on, Keanu Reeves demonstrated, "We can show us what true kindness looks like. Do better than just what is required of us, but because it's the proper course of action." Her remarks resonated with the crew. Gradually but steadily, the culture inside the diner started moving. Mark, who had been listening softly while pouting in the corner, despite her remarks, he said nothing, persisted in his brain. Sarah went back to her the following day, working part-time at a nearby second-hand shop. Her thoughts kept returning to what happened the night before. Keanu's note and kindness had sown a seed of hope within her as she assisted the client selects clothing for their child. She noticed that her smile had increased. Sarah had a longer lunch break than normal. She checked her texts on her phone. She was shocked to see a picture of Danny and her were photographed in the diner. The caption said, "Kindness transforms lives and serves as a reminder that, since we are all human." The post had gone viral in a single day, attracting thousands of comments and likes complimenting Keanu's behaviors. People related their personal narratives of fortitude and thankfulness, establishing one comment's positive ripple effect. Sarah was drawn to this man since he didn't only defend her, he motivated us all to pay it more effectively. Sarah couldn't help but smile as she went. She turned to face Danny, who was sketching image of the little table in the... "Do you remember?" she asked Danny in the break room. The kind man's remarks regarding being strong, Danny replied, nodding enthusiastically. "Wonderful, Mommy and I are expected to take care of you," she chuckled. "Yes, gently, but we can also take good care of others, like he did for." Later that night, when Sarah and Danny passed a homeless man who was seated on, Danny pulled at the corner of the street. "Can we give him my toy, Mommy?" Her sleeve. Sarah knelt down and said, "I don't need it." Proudly gazed at her son. "Are you?" "Yes." "Danny, my dear." nodded. Perhaps it will convince him. Grinning together, they went up to the man, who raised weary eyes to them. Danny gave him the tiny toy that was his face. Luminous with benevolence, the man laughed quietly. Harsh voice that was full of, "Thank you, little guy," he said, grasping the item as though it were the most Sarah and the most valuable item in the world. Danny slightly distanced himself from their hearts. Lighter without Sarah Keanu's knowledge. Had not forgotten her that night. He called someone he trusted at a neighborhood organization I'd want to assist someone with. Merely a single mother and her son. Sarah, they should be given another chance tomorrow. Got a phone call from a stranger. "Hi, this is Sarah," the voice on the phone. The person on the other end requested that we contact. On behalf of a person who has been motivated by. We want to assist you in finding your story. Improved housing and other opportunities. And job assistance for Sarah's hand. She shuddered while holding the phone. "I'm not sure." "Say yes to the voice if you don't know what to say," stated. Kindly as Sarah's life progressed. Started to transform in ways she never envisioned. The impact of Keanu's generosity wasn't limited to her. Offered her son the diner employees and innumerable others who had heard or seen regarding the narrative, but there was one more. Sarah and Danny are in for a surprise that would leave them unable to speak for a week. Sarah and Danny, following the dinner incident, were getting used to their new schedule. Thanks to the community's support, company they had relocated to a small but cozy flat far away. Cry from the small, dilapidated space. Sarah had previously lived there as well. Obtained a better position at a nearby nonprofit where diligence and resilience was acknowledged and appreciated. Danny is now more content and self-assured. Began sketching their new home, as well as the generous stranger who had assisted them. One of his favorite drawings was of Keanu Reeves, which he recorded with pride. He's like a real-life superhero, fridge. One evening, Mommy Danny stated, as they had supper at their newly acquired dining table. Sarah acknowledged that her heart was swollen. Great appreciation, and he demonstrated to us that the world is good, even when it seems to be against everything. During a bright afternoon, there was a Sarah answered the door when someone knocked. Carefully, only to discover a young lady carrying a flower arrangement and the woman said, "Hello," envelope, with a kind grin. "I'm here for Mr. Keanu. I was asked to bring something to Reeves." "Keanu," your Sarah eyes expanded in surprise. "I don't understand the woman, Reeves."